Yeah.
Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to yet another session of Dissecting Capitalism, which is in its third season now. Today, we have with us Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who would be talking to us on economic ethics for the 21st century. We are short on time today, and we have only 30 minutes, so I will dive right into introducing our speaker. He is University Professor and Director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. He has worked extensively with the United Nations and has made seminal contribution towards sustainable development. He has received 41 honorary doctorates, and his recent awards include the 2022 Tang Prize in Sustainable Development, the Legion of Honor by the decree of the President of the Republic of France, and the Order of the Cross from the President of Estonia. His most recent books are The Ages of Globalization, Geography, Technology, and Institutions, published in 2020, and Ethics in Action for Sustainable Development 2022. More about our speakers is on our events page on our YSI platform. A very warm welcome to you, Professor Sachs. You have 20 to 25 minutes for your talk, and we may have 5 to 10 minutes for one or two quick questions. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you, and thank you for asking the right questions about the 21st century and what we should do. We need a new approach. We are a crowded world of 8 billion people. And we are facing multiple crises. We don't get along very well with each other. We are facing geopolitical crises, a hot war in Ukraine, big tensions among the major powers, but also on the economic front, massive, unprecedented inequalities of wealth beyond imagining on one side and extreme poverty on the other. And all of this is coming together with environmental damage and future threats that are also unprecedented at a global scale. After all, 8 billion people, average output per person, depending on how you measure it, somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 per person, again, with measurement issues. But in any event, that's a big world economy. That's an economy of $100 trillion or more, doing incredible damage to just about every ecosystem, fishery, water supply, climate that we have. So all of this means the world economic system is not working properly. That failure was already identified, I'd say 50 years ago, when the collision between the economy and the environment first came to the global awareness at the Stockholm Summit in 1972. It was really clear by the time of the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, but because of failures of our institutions, failures of our political imagination, and failures of our economic ethics, we're not solving these issues. My country, the United States, is more interested in geopolitics and in US hegemony than it is in global prosperity. And this is a huge crisis because the US is wealthy, but not at all generous. It puts its resources into the military. The budget of the US for military purposes is about $1 trillion a year. The budget for development aid, well, it's tiny, maybe 30 or 40 billion dollars a year, maybe 3 or 4% of the military budget. And then somehow the American leaders are confused why the US isn't liked more, and so on. So all of this means that we have a tremendous amount of confusion about what we should be doing and how to go about doing it. So what's the way out of this? The way out of this is first a a proper understanding of our realities in the world in the 21st century. And our realities are a world with advanced technology, incredible inequality, and massive environmental devastation. So what do you do about that? The core idea of what we should do is sustainable development, which means that these technologies should be available for human well-being everywhere, that people have basic economic needs, proper diet, access to healthcare, access to education, access to digital services, access to electricity, that need to be respected for everybody, that we should be investing in technological transformation so that the energy that we undoubtedly need to feed and clothe and provide for 8 billion people is safe, green, renewable energy, not fossil fuel-based energy that is wrecking the climate. And we need to understand that in today's world, no small part of the world can run or should aim to run or should even think about running the whole world. Unfortunately, the North Atlantic region, including the UK and the United States and Western Europe, got used to the idea that they ran the show. Really, for the last 200 years, the world has been dominated by North Atlantic countries. Britain, of course, swallowed up India completely by 1858 in the British Raj. Africa was divided among the European imperial powers at the end of the 19th century. The United States got into the act after World War II in a very big way, with military bases in 80 countries around the world. Come on, this is pretty outrageous, actually. And the American mindset was, well, the Americans have to run the world or the world's going to fall apart, as if the whole world is waiting for 4% of the world, and by the way, 4% that doesn't have a very good sense of history or geography, telling the rest of the world what to do. And it doesn't work. So we're moving from a North Atlantic world to a multipolar world. That doesn't sit very well with the US policy leaders who want this to be a US-led world. But we should also be clear, we've got lots of tensions all over the world, and some of them have nothing to do with the United States. Some of them just have to do with the interactions of other countries. And this is also extremely dangerous. We need India and China cooperating, really cooperating, not as antagonists, but as two giants that are cooperating with each other. We need both cooperating with the African Union, and not the African Union as some fringe in the world, but as a region that has 1.4 billion people, almost exactly the same number as in India and in China. But Africa has been marginalized for hundreds of years by the major powers: slave trade, imperial rule, continued poverty. This is not acceptable either. So my view is sustainable development, multipolarity, global cooperation, and investing properly in our future. And I think that there are a few key pillars of this that I would emphasize. One is that, unlike governance of the past, we actually need quality governance, governments that know what they're doing and that can think ahead and look ahead for 20 or 30 years. The energy transformation, for example, isn't something you accomplish in a year or two. It requires 30-year forward thinking to decarbonize the energy system. That's a big, complicated challenge. It's not going to be accomplished by the market. It's going to be accomplished by public policy combined with market forces, but led by public policy. But governments need to understand the challenge and how to proceed. So this is one point. Second, solutions are going to require transboundary cooperation. Neighbors need to cooperate with each other. Even Pakistan and India, all through South Asia, we actually need countries talking with each other. We need to put aside ancient enmities and get onto practicalities. The Indus River Valley, the Punjab, the protection of the Himalayan region. This is a joint activity for Pakistan and India. We need cooperation, as I mentioned, of China and India, even a power system that spans the two giants, sharing renewable energy systems. So this is another kind of cooperation that's needed. The third area that is critical is finance, because you have to pay for this transformation. And finance involves many, many issues. It involves how budgets are organized. Governments actually need more revenues because they have a responsibility to ensure that education and healthcare and infrastructure reach the poor people, not just the rich people. So the rich people will be reached by the market, but the poor people will not be reached by the market. They will be ignored by the market. So in this sense, we need public policy to ensure universal access. And this is crucial. And the final point that I would mention is we need peace among the major countries. We are not going to achieve any goals in a conflict-ridden world. And somehow, too many politicians have forgotten diplomacy. They think that war is the only approach, or military buildup. Everybody's talking about building up the military right now. What a tragedy and what a waste of resources. And when you look at how horrible these wars are, like the war in Ukraine right now, Ukraine is being devastated by a war between the US and Russia that is being fought on Ukraine's territory. This is actually a US-Russia war, but the Americans say, well, it's good, the Ukrainians are dying, not the Americans. It's a kind of sick idea, but the US pours in the weapons. It wants to expand its military alliance. Russia says, no, we don't want NATO on our border, stay away. You end up with a conflict where neither side hears each other. And then Ukraine thinks, okay, we want to be safe. So they think being safe sides with the United States, but it's ending up getting them destroyed because all it is being in between two giant superpowers, each one just trying to be the more powerful one. It's worse than kids in a playground, except that hundreds of thousands of people's lives are being destroyed. So we're not going to have sustainable development in a world of conflict. We're not going to have sustainable development in a world in which military alliances have divided the world. I would really also hope that India is a great civilization and a great nation is not going to fall into a trap of, well, we're with the Quad siding with the United States against China. This would be a disaster. This is just simple-minded thinking in the world today. Nobody should be against anybody. What we need is common problem solving. We need to understand why different parts of the world have their concerns, and we should listen to them. We should listen to what the red lines of different countries are so that the big powers back off from each other and don't make this kind of war. We should understand that we're at the end of the North Atlantic-led world system, and that everybody wants a chance at well-being and prosperity right now. And, you know, maybe 200 years ago, the British could say, we run the world, or 75 years ago, the Americans could pretend they run the world, but we're way past that right now. We're in a world where people are literate, they have access to information, they want their say, they want a world that is fair for everybody. So this is what the ethics of the 21st century are, that we should have shared prosperity, peace through diplomacy rather than military alliances and wars, a long-term perspective because we have long-term complicated challenges, and cooperation, especially between neighbors, because it's neighbors that share rivers, it's neighbors that share ecosystems, it's neighbors that share coastal waterways, it's neighbors that can trade with each other at the lowest cost. So we need global cooperation, but we especially need strong regions, and to end the old conflicts, because we face bigger challenges in the 21st century than 19th century conflicts. So that's the basics that I'd like to share.
Thank you very much, Professor Sachs, for this wonderful, very brief but very solid discussion. Now we open up for Q&A. We can ask maybe one or two questions. I will just use my dictatorial power and ask the first question.
Good.
If we really listen very carefully to what you proposed, I found that economics is more about politics than what we read in a standard textbook, what is being taught at the universities. So how do you see the difference? You know, I mean, hardly these kind of conversations are taking place on the basic books, like those who are doing bachelor's. How do you see it?
What happened in economics is really interesting. Economics as a field goes back 2,000 years. Koitila in India wrote already about 2,000 years ago about proper management of the state. We had Aristotle writing about economics already 2,300 years ago. But what happened is that all of those considerations basically got pushed aside by the British, especially in the 18th century. Britain was the rising power. They made a kind of economic ideology that was supportive of Britain's rising power, and with some insights, because I think Adam Smith was a very shrewd observer of the division of labor and the role of trade. So The Wealth of Nations is also a wonderful book. But the British idea was basically unconstrained private power. And this showed up in actually the remarkable case of the East India Company being not only a company, but actually an army, a sovereign state that took over India. And that is the idea of the actual market system as it evolved, that it's a mix of power and unleashed ambition. And it organized the world economy for the benefit of the North Atlantic imperial states. So this is the basics. In economics, this was translated into a doctrine: don't interfere in the private activities, even of the East India Company, if that was private. But basically, the doctrine of free market, or the invisible hand, or laissez-faire. Well, these were never sound ideas. Even Adam Smith in Book 5 of The Wealth of Nations talked about the absolute key role of government. You need public goods, one needs regulation, one needs pre-distribution and redistribution. So the idea that a market would by itself provide all the answers is extremely naive and false. But it became a dominant ideology because it's an ideology also of the powerful. It tells the weak, don't expect any help. And indeed, in the second half of the 19th century, when the British Raj was ruling and there were several famines in India, the idea was laissez-faire, don't do anything, don't interfere in the market. Millions of people died. Millions of people died. And yet this was the ideology. Well, this ideology doesn't work. It makes no sense. We need absolutely realistically a combination of private property, which has merit, with public interest, with a role of government, with a role of global cooperation, with an attention to all of the things that a market will get wrong, especially on income inequality and environmental disasters. And so this is why we need really an accurate economic science as well as an economic ethics. And on the ethical side, British ethics is a little weird. It breaks out of a 2,000-year tradition, which is very rich. If you look at the economic ethics actually from the Bhagavad Gita, or you look at the economic ethics from Aristotle, or you look at the economic ethics from the Analects of Confucius, or the Eightfold Path of Buddha, you get a very different idea about what economic ethics is. But we ended up with a very peculiar ethics that says maximize, 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 and do it for yourself. Don't think of anybody else. Just go for it. And of course, this is very destructive of society. Even it's destructive of our individual well-being, because it leads to a world that is just based on competition, not based on cooperation, not based on trust, not based on decency, not based on friendship, not based on civility, not based on peace, but rather on competition. So this is where the revamp needs to happen. And I think it will happen in the 21st century. We've lived through 2 centuries of Anglo-Saxon economics, very peculiar, but basically the economics told from the point of view of the rich and powerful. And now we need an economics that makes sense for everybody.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have 2 minutes more. If somebody wants to ask any question, the last one, no more from this dictator, but somebody from the audience, please. Yeah, no?
Don't be shy.
Oh, there is some, there are many questions. Yes, there are many questions in the chat, actually, I forgot. Okay. Stan, would you like to ask the question by yourself?
Okay, sure. Hi. Thanks for the talk. Hi. I guess my question would just be, since we're training researchers in economics, what would you suggest as some specific ways for us to address the very pressing problems that you have identified?
I think one approach that we all need is to start with the problems and look for the solutions. So if the normal way we're taught is a set of theorems, and you learn the first and second welfare theorems of economics, that a market economy is efficient, Pareto efficient, and so forth. But what if we start with the crisis of climate change, for example? What should be done? What kind of institutions? What are the challenges? What can market forces do to contribute to the solutions? What do they do to contribute to the harms? The problem-solving approach really forces a different perspective. It requires us to confront the actual conditions in the world and address what can be done about it. And I think that that opens up one's eyes. That's my own personal experience as well, which is taking what we think we know about economics, but also taking what we know about global problems and confronting these together and not being satisfied with, oh, that's just how the world is, but rather asking, how can things be made better? And that approach, whether it is addressing inequality or stopping wars, which are an economic phenomenon too, or addressing human-induced climate change, or protecting biodiversity, or ensuring that all children are getting a decent education, even in a poor country where there are lots of poor families. These practical questions open up a universe of problem solving, challenges that are cross-disciplinary, and ethical issues, because they pose ethical problems. Who's responsible? What should be done? How should we behave? How should we think about these problems? Of course, we need new textbooks. We need new approaches. I'm writing a textbook now based on introductory economics, based on sustainable development and I think a more appropriate ethics. So we need a new generation of basic teaching on these issues as well, and that is where I'm hoping myself to help to address this puzzle in the next couple of years.
Thank you, Professor Sachs. Actually, we had many more questions here, but I think you want to go, so maybe next time you will have.
Excellent. We'll continue
usually there are many people, so they want to ask questions. They can't get to you all the time anywhere else, but here they can. So
we'll continue this discussion. These days are extremely packed with crises, so I do have to run right now, but we'll continue, and you're asking all the absolutely great and important questions, so I really applaud what you're doing.
Thank you, Professor Sachs. And I would like to thank the audience for their time, and we will get Professor Sachs again sometime in future. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.